I really appreciate you taking the time. I know you're in the middle of the tour. What is an off day on a tour like this look like for you?
It's a good question. I mean, I always have a to-do list of things. So like we record the show every night, and I just listen back and have notes about front of house mixing, and then I'll talk to the rest of the team and have notes on lighting, and I'll tweak some of the video content and re-render it. So I'm always like working on the show. I mean, this tour was great because we had quite a bit of rehearsal. So I feel like we started the tour with a very mature show, and I'm just still trying to be analytical and see which points I should focus on working on as far as my performance goes. So a day off of the tour is just analyzing the days on, for me at least. Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah. Is it one of those things where, because I think a lot of people would think, it's a strenuous thing. You do these big stage shows, a lot of work goes into it, and then you get to relax for a little. But my impression would be that it's kind of just a marathon the whole way through, whether you're on stage or not.
Yeah, and it's seriously because I love it so much, and I'm so passionate about this show. I don't think I've ever been as passionate about anything in my career as much as I am about this particular live show. It feels like the culmination of so many of my passions and interests. And ever since I was a kid, I made music, and I made visual content, and I created stories, and so there was all of this little interest that I had that I felt like all in magic. Also, I did magic tricks, and so even some of that found its way into the show in some indirect ways.
Yeah.
And so I have so much fun working on it and trying to make it the best it can be. And so when I have some time off, all I want to do is stay in it. I wish I had a show every single night, although it is like physically straining. So I'm glad that we do have days off. But yeah, no, I'm pretty laser focused on it, to be honest. Yeah.
Well, have you always been that way? Like, it makes me wonder if this is sort of, the thing you're the most excited about thus far in your career, and it's kind of this all-consuming thing. What did earlier versions of Madeon Live look like, and how did you experience them that maybe is different now?
Yeah, it was really interesting. I mean, I think every iteration of my each iteration of my performances has taught me a lot, and so I've been doing like production shows now for about like a little over 10 years, and so there's a degree of like familiarity that you gain with experience. So I feel like my earliest show, my earlier shows felt like early explorations. Yeah, like I had not attended many shows because I started touring quite young, and so I didn't have a million references to pull from really, and I enjoyed those shows a lot. I enjoyed performing them immensely, but I could tell there was something upcoming. I could tell that this wasn't the dream quite yet. Whereas like this show, this version of it, I think feels closest to my fantasy. I wanted to do a show that was, because that was embodied and personal and felt like the intersection of my interests, I guess. Yeah.
Well, for people who might not know, what is the process of conceptualizing and building a tour like this like? Like, obviously you have the album to work off of, and that's sort of a body of work to shape the show around. But after that, how does something, kind of this epic come together piece by piece?
Well, interestingly, we debuted the show before the album was finished. It's back in 2019, the original version of it. So it did inform the album to some extent as well. And from the start of so I guess to give some context. So hi, I'm Madeon. I'm a musician, and I'm put out an album called Good Faith. And I'm currently touring a show called Good Faith Forever, which combines, songs from throughout my discography in a live setting. So it's not a DJ show. I'm like singing for a lot of it. I'm not behind a table. I have a lightsaber mic stand, I guess is the best way to describe it. And I play synthesizers and things like that. It's also a very visual heavy show. So like I decided to focus a lot of my energy, if not most of the energy, on creating, video images that I thought would be striking. So that was kind of the priority in this show, is to create those images and portray them live. So to answer your question, yeah, the overall Good Faith era, so the combination of the album and all of the assets and the live show, I started conceptualizing quite a while ago. The genesis of it was like late 2015. And it came to me really, really quickly. I just had like this whole flavor, I think, occur to me. And then I spent a few years like trying to like realize it, right? The initial premise of the show and its general like design came quite early on. So I started drawing mock-ups. And I think the inspiration was that I found that a lot of the electronic shows that I saw that I loved, it felt a little disconnected from the performer, a little disembodied, because a lot of the shows involved the performer hiding within some kind of structure, elaborate stage that kind of like distracted from them. And in contrast to like pop shows or rap shows or rock shows where you could see the full body of the performer and they could move around the stage and there was like human presence. And so I was pulling that thread and I realized, okay, I need gear and my instruments to play with, but how can I like make it make it almost vanish? So there was this idea of having those like plexiglass transparent tables that would have very low profile instruments on either side of me. And for me to be completely unobstructed from the front, right? So you can see my full silhouette and I can address and be present in front of people more as like a frontman than a DJ. And so that was the initial idea. And then pulling that thread and exploring this silhouette concept led to all of the other visual ideas where I realized, well, there's going to be one common thread throughout all of those images, and it's that I'm going to be in front of them. No matter what, a human silhouette is going to be in front of those images. Right. And so that inspired most of the looks of the show. So yeah, I started like accumulating ideas between 2015 and 2019. And then, but actual show production for real, like started only a few weeks before it premiered. We had a production partner, that we were collaborating with, and for a few months before the show premiered at Lollapalooza, and I could tell we were not we didn't visualize the same thing, and a lot of my suggestions for how I thought the show should be produced, they were a little reluctant about. And I really wanted the experience of making the show to be like a collective human experience. I wanted to work with animators in person, in the same room, in the same house, and have this human energy. And the original production company we worked with was more interested in just kind of doing the way that people traditionally do it, which is you hire companies and you give them a pitch and they send you back, content, and you kind of use that. And so 10 weeks before the premiere, we decided to start over. And so we found a new company to work with called Core. And they had just done the Billie Eilish show, which I thought was really good. And they were kind of a new production company. And we went on a call and I described kind of the idea I had. I sent them my treatments, my pitch documents, and they were the first ones to really resonate, and they believed in the vision. And that was so exciting to me. So yeah, we had a very condensed timeline to the original version of the show. And I'm actually really grateful for this timeline because it forced me to not second guess anything and just kind of commit to the idea that I was originally excited about and not get lost in exploration or self-doubt and just commit. So I had a few like images. I saw those like crowds. And the main theme of Good Faith, the album, is human sounds and choirs and gospel choirs and children's choirs and crowds like that. That was a lot of the flavor of it. So visualizing it made sense to have crowds. So choirs on screen joining me, or in some of the darker moments, armies rushing down the screen and things like that. So I was like, okay, I want a lot of human figures and human characters on screen. And so because I wanted it to feel human, I didn't want to do it in 3D. So I wanted to find actors and work with costume designers and do it the way you would produce a live film. So we created some costumes, we found some actors and we shot them, and we did like in one of those like Hollywood green screen studio and just kind of gathered a lot of like raw material. And then we started trying to take all these pieces together and create a visual show out of it. Sorry, I feel like I'm doing it in a somewhat disjointed way. So hopefully the timeline will reemerge.
This is fascinating.
Gotten to tell that story very often, but hopefully it makes some sort of sense. Another thing that happened prior to that actually is that I knew that I wanted the show to be like live action heavy and not involve too much 3D. And it has some 3D moments, but it's mostly live action. But I didn't want to rely on like stock footage or things that everybody could use. I wanted to go out and capture my own footage. And so me and my videographer and manager at the time, we went on a road trip across America soon after I moved to America, and with a team of videographer and photographers and some drones and things like that, and we just drove around those scenic landscapes and captured our own footage with our own flavor, our own angles. And so we just started like capturing a lot of these things without really knowing how it would land, how it would be used, but just having an intuition. And so so when it came time to actually produce the show, I had all these elements, right? All of those drawings, all of those like general concepts. And I had these characters that I had filmed. I had these big landscapes that we had filmed. And then now it was time to edit that into those kind of fantastical images. And I was so happy to see the puzzle really come together. So we took those landscape footages, and then we found some processing techniques that were kind of unique to us and like our own like secret sauce to make it this kind of psychedelic, colorful, moving images. We created Mike, my friend Mike Kludge, one of the 4 animators for Good Faith Live, created at my request this like MIDI machine where I could use my DJ controller to create crowd shots. So like one fader would like multiply the number of people on screen, another fader would like have them animate a certain way, change the angle, change the speed. And so I could just like dial in all day and create this like epic crowd imagery the way that I would mix a DJ set, so it was incredibly fun. And so we created a lot of like clips like that. And so, yeah, all of those pieces ended up coming together, and we developed this language. And so just like I wanted, I found those people that I admired and that I felt like had like unique perspectives. And we gathered all of them into one house in an Airbnb for a month. And we just stayed there together, working 16 hours a day, turning those sketches into like a real show. And everybody brought their own kind of unique experience and skill. Everybody was a specialist at something else, and the energy and the magic that emerged from that group was honestly hard to overstate. It was really, really special and one of the most creatively fulfilling moments of my life. So obviously I've been talking a lot about the visual component of the show. There's obviously an audio component, which I worked on in parallel. And that I had a little bit more experience on because I had done multiple live shows in the past that definitely like come from the lineage of like French electronic live shows, that I grew up with. So like the Daft Punk, A Live Show, or Justice, or, all those shows where artists kind of like revisit their discographies and combine it together into this kind of like flowing mashup style. Right. And that's always the way that I've liked electronic live shows. So I'd done it a couple of times. I'd done it for my first album, for the Adventure and Pixel Empire tour. And then I'd done it with my friend Porter Robinson for our joint Shelter tour, where we combined both of our discographies into a single show. So the idea of taking a couple of different albums and creating something new out of it was something that I was already kind of used to. But this time, because the starting point of the show was so visual heavy, it inspired the way that I arranged the set list and created those live versions of the songs, because I would create musical moments for the sake of creating images. So it was interesting, which was the opposite of the way I'd done shows in the past. So yes, I just put together this kind of live version and created new versions of my first album singles that sounded more in the vein of the second album in a way. But right away I knew that Good Faith Live, the show, was going to be like a kind of yin yang companion to Good Faith the album. So Good Faith the album is very daytime and optimistic and positive, and Good Faith the show, I wanted it to feel more threatening and darker and vast and epic. And so it was really interesting to finally be able to explore some of those like musical themes that I had purposefully like forbidden from the album, to curate an identity. And so that's kind of how the musical dimension of the show came together.
Yeah, that's fascinating, man. I mean, there's so much in what you just said. I wrote down a couple points to kind of dig into. But one thing that you just said that I think is really interesting is trying to bring out the darkness in the live show. Because I think listening to Good Faith, the album, you're right that it is kind of a sunny daytime. If you're just listening to it kind of, and not fully processing it. Yeah, it's a cheery sounding album. But I think lyrically, there is some darkness there.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's interesting to try to think about making something that sounds happy, but contains darkness in it,
Yeah, it's that. I'm so glad you picked up on that. I'm really grateful for that, because I feel like sometimes I'm not totally sure if I explain the album properly in a way. And so when people catch on to it, I'm so happy. Thank you. Yeah, it's an album that is obviously very personal and touches on and was inspired by some of my like mental health struggles and relationship with really, really almost dangerous high points of joy and inspiration, combined with their inevitable tragic come downs and the dangers of that. And so my relationship to those cycles is kind of the running thread of the album. And so and the campaign, the era in general. So the album itself is more preoccupied with those high points, but you can feel the danger. Like in a song like Be Fine, on the surface level, it just feels like very celebratory, but it's hopefully you can see that there's a danger to this happiness, that it's unsustainable. And then and I'm like, some of the lyrics like, make it so the fire never stops, and I'm just kind of clearly consumed by it in a obsessive way. And a lot of the copy and the live show has a lot of text and graphic element that flashes really fast. So the idea is you're not able to really read it, but you feel it. There's certain words that pop up, and they're not from the lyrics. They're like, it's its own copy that I wrote. And if you take a photo of the show, you can read it at home, maybe. And so I love the copy there is purposefully like manically happy and euphoric in a way that is concerning. It's a lot of like, I will feel like this forever. This is running through my vein. I feel like I will, and it's just this kind of like concerning enthusiasm. And like songs like Nirvana and things like that kind of touch on that feeling on the album as well. And there's also like themes of anxiety and like in songs like All My Friends. And so I figured like it made sense for the show as a companion to focus a little bit more on those, that the darkness and the danger of it and the consequence of it.
Yeah, well, I love that, man. I think one thing when I was reading up a little bit, when I knew we were coming to come talk together, is that you've mentioned that the concept of joy just in general was kind of a central part of writing Good Faith and conceptualizing it, and just that feeling of joy. And kind of what you're talking about right now reminds me of that too, where, well, before I state my opinion, I wanted to ask you, what is joy to you? Like, what does that mean to you?
So I think the highest point of my life that I experience are kind of attached to a form of danger, and I can sense their unsustainability, but it is the highest point of my life. So I feel like my definition, the joy that I'm now sick, is different than when I made Good Faith. Like now I feel like I've started to understand myself better, and I know that the joy that I should work toward is closer to peace than it is to euphoria. But back when I was making Good Faith, I was in this constant chase of that high, and I think it must be in some ways parallel to some people's, relationships with addictions or things like that. I'm thankfully I've never really had any issue there, but I know that some people have heard the album and drawn parallel to maybe their own experiences, which is completely a valid interpretation as well. But yeah, so back when I made Good Faith and conceptualized the era, joy for me was this kind of like golden promised land that I just try to return to and make last forever. Back when I made the album, I hadn't understood exactly what it was, or the kind of medical dimension of it. Yeah, I just thought that was me. That was the real me. And anytime I wasn't feeling that way, I was just lost, and I needed to return to it. And so that was the joy that I was concerned with when I made that project. It's that kind of dangerous euphoria. Yeah.
Which makes total sense. And I think anybody who makes music, anybody who just listens to music in general, anybody who appreciates, has a passion for art, can relate to that, because there is something about art. Like, to me, joy is like, it's a wordless thing, right? And it's a feeling that when you're experiencing it, but you can't really hold on to it. You can't just sort of snap your fingers and make it happen. It is that kind of unexpected thing that, you're absolutely right, makes you want to chase it again. I mean, it made me think about, you were talking about earlier, the concept of the human voice in Good Faith, and the concept of live voices and using gospel recordings and that sort of thing. And one thing I noticed, I don't know if this was intentional or not, but a lot of the way you chop vocals on the album too kind of reminded me of that wordless euphoria as well, where it wasn't always words necessarily, but you would hear, just the chops of the vocals, and you would get that kind of that spirit without actually, necessarily being told what it meant behind it.
Yeah, I think it's probably just part of the experience of being a foreigner who's for whom English is not their first language, who loves English language music. Where I grew up listening to songs that were just a collection of sounds that didn't have any lyrical substance, and so I am very comfortable with meaninglessness that I feel like is still embedded with emotion. And so, yeah, that's totally right. Although on that album, I did start realizing the power of words and lyrics, and so I became more concerned with them and more careful with them than I was in the past. But I still am attached to the idea of having an emotion that is transmitted through chops that are ultimately meaningless, because they don't need words to communicate what they want to communicate. So the dream, for example, has those like choir chops that you're right are not saying anything in particular. And yet, I feel like you would completely understand what they're trying to say, hopefully.
I mean, it's interesting, you mentioned earlier that when a lot of this kicked off and when you became Madeon the artist, you were very young and maybe hadn't had all of the life experiences that allows somebody to process, an encompassing career like this at that point. I mean, when you look back at yourself at because you started age 16, you were kind of already blowing up, right? Like if you look back at yourself in those days, how do you see it now? Is there anything you look back on? Like, do you feel like starting that young, having that success that young, are there any particular, benefits, drawbacks to that?
I'm pretty convinced that the way my life has unfolded is the best case scenario, and I feel incredibly lucky and grateful. I don't think there was any other trajectory that would have worked out for me. I was failing at school very dramatically. I was very unhappy, very lost, and I was very inhabited by that desire of being a music producer, and making music, and it was so strong in me, and I feel like probably would have destroyed me if I had like tried so hard and completely failed. So I'm impossibly grateful. I don't think I have any room to complain about it, and I think I just got lucky with timing as well. Like I made music and electronic music at a time where we didn't really have examples of success to look to that felt realistic. There wasn't really any like teenage producer that I could imagine becoming or something like that. It was just a thing to do to like impress my internet friends and to try to develop a skill. And then I had this like secret dream and ambition of doing it professionally, but the idea of it becoming like a real artist project with all of the freedom that it affords is unreal. Yeah. So and it just so happens that the skills I was working on coincided with an interest from the world and from America about electronic music, at the time. And so, yeah, no, I don't think it came with much downsides. And I think I also, was decently like well surrounded. And so I was pretty protected, so I don't feel like it corrupted me or robbed me of my youth or anything. I just was, it felt also like quite similar to what I was doing even before, because ever since I was 11 or 12, I was really focused on creative endeavors, so I was like writing novels and I was inventing like magic tricks, and I was like doing graphic design and doing animation and doing music and like making little albums and printing them onto CD and doing little artworks and everything. So it felt like everything that I was already doing was just now doing it in front of people. The only thing that was new that I wasn't anticipating was being in front of people and doing shows. And that came quickly because of the pop culture mashup. So there was like an appetite for me to perform live quicker than I expected.
Right.
And thankfully, I mean, I kind of adjusted to it, because first couple of times I did DJ sets and did shows, I had like what I now realize were panic attacks, because I was 16-year-old and suddenly in front of people, and the stakes felt so high. But somehow I just kind of adjusted to it quickly and ended up getting a lot of joy from it. And it made sense. I guess a lot of my young life was also like interested in performance and performing. And so, yeah, I feel like having this career young was just a great fit for me. Like I felt kind of ready. Like I had a plan, you know, I was like determined. I was so scared of school and of higher education and having a normal job and all these things. I was so terrified at that prospect. I just was so nervous at the idea of having the same life as my parents. It was like such a fire in me. Like I needed this to happen. And so, I'm sure there's a lot of young artists who deal with it in ways where it's like can be destructive for them. And I really empathize with that because there's definitely a lot of challenges that come with it. I feel very lucky that I think it was just a good fit for me. You know, I just really mostly enjoyed myself. I mean, I had obviously a lot of other issues to deal with, but I think they would have flared up even without a music career.
Well, where did those inclinations to be creative at 11 and 12, where does that come from? Do you know if it's not necessarily parents? Was it peers? Was it someone you were looking up to or a mentor or just internet culture? What was it?
I think I just really appreciated art through the lens of like trying to recreate it. And like, that was my way of engaging with the world, is imagining. So like, if I watched a movie, I would like, in a way, empathize with the director more than the characters. You know, I was like, how is it made though? Like, why? Like, how does it feel to have made it?
Yeah.
Like, I've created this thing. And so and so that was always an instinct I had, like where my brother would like show me a video game on like Nintendo 64 when I was 7 years old. And immediately the first thing I did afterward was that I would like take some cardboard and build my own little fake game console and then do little slits of paper to create my own game. I'm like, oh, like I love Zelda. Well, I'm going to create my own game. It's going to be called this and it's going to be that. And that's going to be the thing. Or I would read a book that would move me. I used to read a lot. And then I would think like, I want to write my own thing. And I think the reason that I felt like it was possible to create things myself is just because I was very lucky that my parents shown me and my siblings computers early on solely as tools of creation. So the idea that for me, the computer was a tool you use to create. And I was barely aware that there were games on it or any form of entertainment. To me, that's, he showed us the computer and he showed us like, here's Paint. You can do little drawings. Here's Word. You can type little stories and print them out if you want. And here's, this thing. So now go have fun. And he would let us use his work computer. And I was so fascinated. And I think the thing that fascinated me the most was the printer. Because the idea that I could imagine something with my mind, translate it to a computer, and then press a button, and then I would have a physical object that I could like fold and put in my bedroom, and it would now exist alongside my toys, alongside my books. It would have as much of a tangible reality as anything else that I owned, was mind-blowing. And I think that first experience of like printing something I had created and having it in my hands just became the inspiration for the rest of my life, basically. And so from then on, I realized like everything that I love was made by people, and I can make something too. So yeah, I would film little movies by borrowing like a camcorder, and I would, yeah. So I remember like I first got into electronic music by seeing a Daft Punk documentary when I was 11. I remember, I think that very night, like I went on the computer and downloaded, I was 10. I downloaded Audacity. And I had no idea how they made those sounds. It was around the time that I released Human After All. And, Human After All is an album that has a lot of those like vowel sounding kind of formant textures. And so I was like, it must be voices, right? So I would just went in the computer's microphone and just said like, just do like, wow, and try to imitate the sound from the album. And then I would click around to try to make it sound like them. And it didn't sound anything like it, but I would still take it and loop it and make it into songs. And I made a whole album like that of just me doing weird noises with my mouth and doing loops. And then I printed it on CD and was like, well, I made an album too. It's not good, but I made something, and I'm going to try again until it's as good as the stuff that I love, And so right away, like I didn't go from like being I'm listening to it and I appreciate it and I enjoy it as a passive listener. And maybe in the future, I want to do it myself. Like my way of appreciating something was through the idea that I could create it too. So that's just a lens that I appreciate stuff through, I think. And so that's why I had all these like hobbies,
Yeah, that makes total sense. I mean, I think, participating in the culture rather than just appreciating it. Or
that's a great word. Participating is exactly what I was feeling. It was like, I wanted to participate. That's exactly right.
Yeah. And it makes me think too, and you can tell me if I'm totally off base here, but hearing you talk about the just the way you felt about art and music at the time, it makes me think about my own childhood and about the idea of connection, say like human connection. Like if you weren't doing well at school, or it felt like I just don't fit in this mode in general, was that part of it as well, of being like, well, if I create this, I can kind of feel seen and understood, and in the same way that I feel like I see the people behind the things I love?
So surprisingly, probably not, because I didn't show the stuff that I created to anybody. So I think I was more concerned with being the creator than I was with being really like seen or understood. But I guess it's maybe because I always had the idea that I was going to wait until I was good enough to show the world. So my parents never heard a single song I made until I was signed.
Wow.
And I would tell them like, hey, I'm going to quit school and do music, but I'm not going to play you what I'm making. So they had no idea if it was any good.
They must have loved that.
Yeah. And my parents were not creators. My parents barely listened to music, and they were so they were very supportive and amazing, but definitely not the impetus behind like that. And, but I guess they created an environment that was conducive to that, because my brother makes video games, so he's also creative. And yeah, it's really interesting. I didn't really want to show people what I was making. And I was, to some degree, a little embarrassed about my taste, where some of the music that I was really into, I knew that none of my friends liked. It was some like German dance music and things like that. Yeah. And like, it just wasn't what people were listening to. And so I guess I was more, I was making it and I liked it and I listened to things like it, but I just wasn't showing it to anybody or trying to, and it wasn't really my identity at school. It was something for me,
Yeah.
But I was so proud of creating it and then printing it to a CD and having it, holding it, and knowing that I've made something that exists now, that is part of my world, that is in my bedroom, that exists. So it was more about that experience than it was about connecting with others through art at that stage. Yeah. That came later.
That makes sense. Well, when did the internet come into play? Because reading about the boards and, you connecting with Porter early on and all that, how did that come into all the rest of it?
Yeah. So I was kind of creating stuff in isolation until the internet came along, and I was more like, I guess 12, 13 years old, and realized there were online communities of other people making music. So I connected with them, and I made a lot of like amazing close internet friends from all around the world, from Norway and Switzerland and Belgium and America. Actually Porter was the only American guy I knew that made this type of music or cared for it. So we connected because we were the two like youngest kids in these kind of online communities that were making music like decently well, so like we found each other like that and we chatted. And at the time my English was decent but not fluent, but I was so interested. I thought he was so interesting. He was very, very well spoken, it was clearly much smarter than everybody else in those communities. And so I just felt like I wanted to get to know him. So we chatted, we exchanged, I was like 13, 14, something like that. He was 17, maybe 16, 15 actually, probably. Yeah, I think he was 15 when we met. Yeah, I think that's it. So yeah, very young. And he, and I could feel like I could have interesting conversations with him. And so I just kind of like taught myself English partly for that, it's like, I want to be able to communicate. And that proved handy later on, obviously like, to communicate with people. And so we exchanged music, and in a way, like, it was a friendship / rivalry / helping each other out / competing to try to get as good as the other. And when one got a little bit better, the other one, I need to get there. And I think it made us kind of accelerate our skill sets fairly quickly, because we just had this dynamic, and so that was really great. And then I had a lot of other internet friends that I also like, got so much from, and hopefully, so we exchanged all these things. What was great about the communities at the time is that it was, in the genres of music we were making, there was no example of success.
Right.
Really. Like our heroes, our dreams, the thing we wanted to become, were not like superstar millionaire DJs jet setting around playing arenas. They were like, like making a living, playing a club show every once in a while. And like, it was pretty modest. But to us, that was like the insane ceiling. Like, can you imagine?
Oh yeah.
Like my actual dream was like, I want to make at least like minimum wage, like making music. And that's my dream. And like, I wasn't dreaming any bigger than this. And I don't think any of us were. And most of us were not even dreaming of making it, like doing it professionally. So there was something very pure but an environment where we really did it for the skill and for the craft. And there was no other fantasy kind of distracting it.
I mean, I think, so yes, not to cut you off, but I think that,
no, please.
That makes me think about what you were talking about with getting everyone together in the same house to build the good faith live show. I mean, all the best shit comes out of when you're just trying to impress your friends or just getting excited about something your little community is doing. To me, that is the purest thing. And that's, interestingly, I think that's the hardest thing to get back to once you do start seeing some success.
Absolutely. I think Porter actually said that to me once and it really stuck with me. It's like enthusiasm is like a very precious currency. And you want to make sure to nurture it, to preserve it, to spend it wisely. And so you want to create environments of enthusiasm. And that kind of create this feedback loop of enthusiasm. And as soon as your motivations become fear or insecurity or envy or greed or any of those things, it is really hard to make compelling art. And so I find that, when I work alone, it's different. And a lot of my work is like kind of solitary, like the music side of it is quite solitary because I do the production, the mix, master, all that. So I do love working with people, but a lot of the material I end up doing quite solitarily, but the show is a collective experience. And so there's this new skill that I had to like develop, which is kind of almost like a management skill of creating a culture, of creating a dynamic, of creating a shared vision where everybody feels like you're working toward the same goal and you're working hard because out of love, out of enthusiasm, out of joy, and not out of like a fear or consuming competition and things like that. And you're right. It's actually like something that sometimes you're lucky to see emerge naturally, and sometimes you need to design.
Yeah.
And so when I do manage to be in situations that feel like that, it is precious and magical, and it is when the best shit like emerges. I think great art often comes from great human experiences. And with the video team, the architects that for the show, we've become great friends. We talk all the time now. When they work on other like right now, some of them are working on like visuals for like a different like pop artist or something, and they're like, what do you think about that? Like, what kind of effects would you use? And so we're still like helping each other out like that, like even removed from Madeon sometimes. And then I was like the witness at one of their wedding, so like we just got so close through making this project. And that's like this magical human experience. And so I think there was a little bit of that back in those early days with those internet friends, where the environment, was just inspired by enthusiasm and excitement and wanting to do cool stuff. And you're right that that's usually when cool things happen. But then, it shifted actually. Like the timeline at the time felt very slow because I was so young. So when you're like 17, 5 years is like a third of your life. So it feels like forever. But now that I look at it, it's actually pretty condensed. Around the same time, roughly, like Porter started making like more like electro music, and I started doing the Madeon project. I was more like inspired by like UK pop and house music and just a few like all of my influences at the time that were like like an amalgam. Like I was a huge fan of Fred Falk and Stuart Price and like that type of pop production. And I decided, hey, let me make a project that feels more like the stuff I actually love now. And so I started the Madeon project, and both Porter and I were lucky to gain some traction, like roughly around the same time. At the time in pretty different lanes. Like he was really like electro house, like complextro, and I was more in the UK pop world in a way. Yeah. And so it was great to have like somebody that was also young and like having their life kind of change to talk to and to be able to share those experiences and advices and like have this so that was really, really, really cool, like special. And so I just got very lucky where the timing worked out, where school was started to becoming unbearable. And so I quit school when I turned 16, which is the legal age to stop going to school in France. And I kind of told my parents, don't worry, I'll finish high school somehow. Just give me some time. And I tried, I was like, okay, I need to figure out a way to monetize my musical skills so that I can tell my parents that I have a job so they don't force me back to school. So kind of behind their back, I started doing I did ghost production work for people. I did lots of remix contests that had like a cash prize, just so I could just anything so I could prove that, hey, this could actually be a job, parents, And so I did stuff like that. And some of it, I guess, caught the attention of publishers. And I think a lot of it were just the curiosity of the fact that I was quite young. And so there weren't a lot of examples of like producers that were, it's more common now because of the access of the technology. But and which is awesome. But like back then, yeah, it was kind of a bit of a curiosity, I suppose. And so suddenly all these like British like A&R from major labels and publishers started showing up at our door. And my parents were like, what's going on there? That to meet with them. And so they're like, I guess something's happening. And then, yeah, it all kind of started snowballing really quickly. And yeah, within months, I went from quitting school to like touring Australia and having a record deal and all that stuff. And so there wasn't really there wasn't like, yeah, that awkward middle between school and my career was luckily like quite condensed.
Yeah.
I don't know how it would have worked out if it had taken a few years. Like maybe I was ready. Like I was starting to feel like maybe this is all a pipe dream. Maybe I'm irresponsible. Maybe I need to start working at school. And then I was like bracing myself for that realization. And then instead all my dreams came true. and so which is why I still feel like this is still like bizarre. Like I'm pretty aware that this is like close to best case scenario. And I feel a responsibility to like make the most of that opportunity because I feel like I got really lucky. So yeah.
I mean, and that makes sense, man. But then part of that is what we started off talking about, right? Which is making sure that you're in a place to be able to do that, right? And being able to sort of balance it and take care of yourself. And because I totally understand and relate to what you're saying as far as just feeling lucky to be doing what we're doing and that it is a precious thing and that, there is a certain responsibility that if we're lucky enough to be in a great position to contribute and all of that. But then at the same time, I mean, you're talking about the dancing so close to the flame, you get burnt out, that kind of thing. Was that, how quickly, I guess is my question, did that sort of thing start to come in once you're 16, 17, going on these whirlwind tours, rubbing shoulders with artists that you were only seeing on the internet before, and really having a fan base of people who all of a sudden there was a demand for the stuff you weren't letting people hear before?
I guess I kind of forgot about a little bit some of that era, so I need to re-explore it. I have a few key memories of anxiety and fear, and I remember specifically like soon after it all kind of blew up, I was very uninspired for a while, and I toured a lot, but I felt like a fraud. Like I couldn't come up with anything good, and this window of time between me doing my first like 3 singles and me doing my first album was kind of difficult, and I was like, okay, this is all going to go away now. And I remember my label at the time didn't really like I did that song Technicolor, which like my fans loved. Yeah. And it was like but that my label just did not understand. And I realized, I'm kind of like, I feel a little alone here. And so, as far as having a fan base, I'm such a fan of artists, like, and today as well, like I'm not jaded. I have a shrine to my favorite artist. I am in the Discord server and Reddit subreddits of like my favorite artists. Like I'm a pure fan. I buy their merch. I know what it's like to be a fan of an artist, and because I am, and so it makes it easy to figure out like to think about like the fan experience. Like I always think about what is it like to be a fan of Madeon? Is it fun? Is there substance? Is it worth discussing? If I wasn't Madeon, would I be a fan of Madeon? And so I just compare it to my experience with other artists, and are certain artists there, maybe I get a little frustrated with them for whatever reason, and other artists I'm like so engaged with and I try to learn from that. So it felt like a fun game, like being in that situation where like I can experience it from the other side and try to do something that I would like. And so it felt very playful. And so I didn't feel too, I feel like that was one of the good parts, and for sure. And I loved having a community build, and especially because, and I swear I'm not pandering, but I feel like my fans are really cool.
Yeah.
Like they tend to be really creative, motivated, like generally caring and kind, and people that I resonate with. I think it must be difficult when you cultivate an audience that's very different from your taste or who you are. And I think it's really special when, as an artist, you start to create a community that resembles you, that reminds you of yourself, and that. So I felt really lucky for that, because I felt very understood by my fans from the get-go. I didn't always felt understood by the label. I didn't always feel understood by the industry. I didn't always feel understood by French media, but I definitely felt understood by my fans, and especially my American fans. Yeah. But so that was great. I guess your question was, what did it I'm trying to circle back to the question. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, I'm also mentally trying to. Sorry, I kind of forgot what I asked you in the first place. But I will say one thing you just made me think of is that talking about being a pure fan of artists, even when you're a working artist yourself, is something I talk about on this podcast all the time. I think it's super important for creatives to kind of engage with that part of themselves. I think it's part of getting back to that more pure place we were talking about a minute ago. But I wanted to ask you for maybe this is an interesting way to talk about your work with Lady Gaga, who I have to imagine you were a fan of.
Massively, yeah.
And then all of a sudden you're working with the sort of larger than life thing that you're a fan of, and what that experience is like.
Yeah, so I had a few, I was definitely a mega Gaga fan, because my background in the early days of Madeon was not so much electronic music as like pop, like I was more of a fan of Lady Gaga and, producers like Stuart Price and like British pop stars and things like that, than I was really of like the dance music that was happening around then. So, it was so yeah, I remember going when Born This Way, the Gaga album came out. I just skipped school to go buy it like that morning and get like both versions and stuff like that. And on my ride to school, so I got kicked out of my first school. So I had to go to a different school. I was much further away. So every morning I had like 40 minutes on the bus on the way there and then on the way back, which is the average duration of a pop album. So every day I would listen to a pop album on the way there, on the way back, a different one. And I would just like study it and try to think like, and I try to recreate some things like, how would I produce it? So, and Gaga specifically, I thought about a lot. When that opportunity came about, that was literally the top of my list of dreams in collaborations. Like I felt insanely lucky that it worked out.
And that happened kind of early as well, right?
Yeah, 2012, yeah, something like that. So very early. Crazy. So she had her finger on the pulse of what was happening in dance music at the time. And so I guess, yeah, like and she, I mean, I don't want to tell her story, but she's really, really awesome. Like, and so she definitely lived up to everything I could hope for, and I had an incredible time. I know that retrospectively, like she's talked about that era of her life, like 2013, 2012. And I know that it was actually quite a difficult time for her, but she was always so gracious and kind and giving with me. And she gave me a lot of time and she made people feel valued, and so and I'm sure there were difficult aspects that I just didn't see, I didn't notice as a child, but for me, it was like a purely positive experience, to be honest. And sometimes I remember at the time my insecurities, my regrets, where I felt like, I feel like I wish, because it kind of happened during a lull in my creativity. And it was like, I wish this was happening while I was like peaking with ideas. And I still made work that I'm really proud of, that is songs that we worked on together from back then that I love. But yeah, mostly it was the proximity to this scale that I found kind of life-changing. Yeah, like I loved megastars and I love grandiosity, just aesthetically.
Yeah.
And it's not even like, and so sometimes like in the show visuals is all of like grand images and stuff. And it's kind of incidental that I'm in them. Like, it's not like an ego thing. It's like, I think it's cool images. And I think of myself more as the director than the character in a way. And it's kind of incidental that I'm in the middle of it. But like, anyway, my point is that with Gaga, like everything was so vast and everything she came into this, like her life was, especially at the time, like, I mean, and to this day still, but like at the time she was very much like the most famous person in the world and like a degree that was hard to comprehend. So every day was the most insane story, the most insane people, the most insane everything and the coolest thing. And so she had constant ideas and good ideas and she writes all the songs. So she would just like casually come up with like the best melodies and the best, it was really great. And I remember like sitting at the piano with her and she hadn't played piano for a while and like showing her these chords. And we had a lot of very like important human moments, and that really like shaped kind of me in ways that so I don't know. I don't want to overshare, because it's also kind of intimate memories, but I guess all I'll say is that, it was a positive experience for me that, that informed the way I moved forward thereafter. I had other cool experiences. I got to work a little bit with Coldplay and with Tudor Cinema Club and do things like that, Ellie Goulding's, so I did a lot of like pop production kind of work at the time and it was really fun. And it also made me realize that like the really, interestingly, like the really big artists, the real superstar are the gracious ones that are kind, that are not divas, and and I think it's sometimes when you're more like insecure about where you stand is when you behave in ways that are less generous. And so it was a good reminder that like, hey, like if Lady Gaga is cool and makes people feel valued, then you have no excuse to be a dick, ever. So it was kind of like, that was also another cool lesson from it. But and then we got to reunite actually recently on Chromatica, right. Because my friend Michael Bloodpop was executive producing the album Chromatica, and he had started this idea for this song, and he wanted my thoughts on it. And I didn't think I was going to work on it, but then eventually I was just suggesting people that could work on it, and eventually he asked me to do it, and I just did. Showed up to the studio, worked on that song that became like 911, and so I got to see Gaga again, and we hadn't seen each other in a few years, and it was like a really nice, like emotional moment. She was, we were kind of reminiscing about that time, and it was interesting. Yeah. It was really cool.
Yeah, she's got to be proud of you too, man. That's got to be, I don't know, to see what you've done since then.
I'm not completely sure how aware she is of my career, to be completely honest with you.
That's fair.
But I think she's quite busy. But she's always like she I think she was really excited about what we did on 911 and everything. And so it was nice. Mm-hmm. But and I was so happy because it came out as a single, and there was a music video and everything. That was my dream. I wanted to do a Lady Gaga single.
Right.
And I had never, like on the last album, none of the songs that I made really like became a proper single internationally. So that one I was like, yes, like, even though, and full credit, this song was also co-written with Justin Trenter, an amazing songwriter, and co-produced with Michael with Bloodpop. But it was cool to be like, hey, like this is a real legit Lady Gaga single with a cool music video, and those are my drums, my bass sound, and my chord change. And I just inserted my little contribution to pop history, and like 15-year-old me would think it's the coolest thing in the world, and 26-year-old me still think it's the coolest thing in the world. So super grateful for that experience. It's interesting because I don't think that Madeon fans are that interested in like the work that I do for other artists like that. I don't think it overlaps that much. But for me, it's like super important, and I'm super proud of it.
Well, yeah. And I mean, maybe Lady Gaga fans aren't that interested in who produced the songs either, right? But I think
they are. Lady Gaga fans are great, actually.
Oh yeah. I wasn't trying to talk shit about them, but
no, I know.
Just a pop fan in general. Like, I guess what I'm trying to get at is there's layers to making this kind of stuff, right? Where I think the fan experience and just hearing a catchy song and loving it is just as valid as the artists themselves nerding out and going deep about, like, Lady Gaga obviously has impeccable taste. She's engaged. She's searching out, interesting people, not just you, but I mean, like that last one, she got like my buddy Little Texas, who I don't know if you know him, but he makes like crazy gabber and hardcore stuff. And I talked on this podcast to Chami, who worked with her for a bit as well, which again is maybe another person that your average pop fan wouldn't immediately be like, oh, this is obviously who Lady Gaga is going to work with. But I think there's something about just getting together with other people who have similar tastes, or people who you think their taste is good, that is just exciting to be like, well, if I'm a fan of their taste, what could we make together?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally.
Yeah, it's interesting, man. I mean, so here's a theory I have, and again, you can tell me to fuck off, but I was talking to Chami, and I've talked to other French artists about this too. I have a theory that there's sort of, from a baseline level in French culture, in French art or French artists, there's a certain higher level of appreciation or engagement than a lot of other places in the world, where I feel like a lot of French artists sort of start off with a stronger foundation of like making something classy, or making something respectfully, or honoring their influences. And I've always tried to figure out if anyone knows what that is, or if that's even a real thing. Chami and I were kind of talking about that idea that he said maybe the French people have a certain respect or honor for the people who came before them that isn't always found in every culture. But I don't know, man. Is that something you've ever thought about? Do you think there's anything to that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to do like generalization, but it's definitely like, I just with sheer exposure, like the kind of, specifically in electronic music, the kind of electronic music that was popular in France, was like the French Dutch eras and the French Dutch 2.0 justice kind of era, they happen to be scenes that were comprised of artists, a lot of which incidentally were like former graphic designers and whose like culture was involved, like really carefully curated like art direction. And so it just kind of became the baseline of reference. We were like, well, if you're an electronic artist, you need to have, a tight identity, and there's a sense of exclusivity, and it's like all of these things that just became associated with it just through sheer exposure. So once you become an electronic artist, you think about who inspired you, and they had in common, I guess, this interest in like crafting like a tight like universe and things like that. And so I guess that might be part of the explanation. And then I think there's something a little like almost like serious about dance music in France that maybe isn't the same in every country. Yeah, like
well, it's interesting. You saying that just made me think. I feel like French dance music is the dance music that both takes itself the most seriously and also the least seriously at the same time.
I could definitely see that. And that makes sense. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
But there's like, but it's something almost like institutional about dance music in France. It's like, it's not like just like, I guess it's evolving. Like, I don't know what the French scene like feels like necessarily these days, but like growing up, there was something like, I always felt like I was not cool enough to make dance music. Like it was something for like,
right.
It was something very sophisticated and unattainable. Whereas I think in many other cultures, it's something where there's like something more fun and casual and trivial about dance music, But for me, dance music was intimidating almost, like that world, like the artists, the labels, the thing, the scene. It just felt, it's interesting.
Is it weird for you now? I'll wrap this up in a second, but we talked about how when you were starting off, there wasn't necessarily an example of what you wanted to become that you could just look at. And now we're talking about how it was maybe an intimidating thing to think about being a part of. Is it weird for you now to probably have kids looking at what you're doing as that kind of inspiration, like being the thing that maybe didn't exist for you when you were that age?
No, it's not weird because I really love the idea of transmission. It's an idea and a concept I'm preoccupied with and that I love. Like I wrote several songs about wanting to be a father and pass things along. The song Shelter is about that with Porter. It's just this theme that is like quite fundamental to me. And so I love the idea that there's so much art that really moved me and that informed what I made. And then I'm going to make my own small contribution. There's going to be this one trope, this one idea, this one thing that will exist because of me that somebody else will take on and the cycle will continue. And I'll just be part of this like long tradition. And my goal, my ambition is to just make a cool contribution, but like there's something about, I just think it's like, I don't know. I think being on both sides of it, you realize how cute it is. You know what I mean? There's something about like how not that different being a super fan and being an artist is. And like I think I just find it all like kind of adorable, like in a way, like I don't know. It's maybe not be the right word, but like, it's like, I love, like going on stage and being this figure and like posing and like doing my really grandiose show and stuff sometimes. And then also the next day going and attending a show where I'm in the crowd screaming and singing my favorite artist and like they show up and I feel like, so I feel like it's this cute little game that we play, all of us collectively. And we're all the same, we're all just people. We're all just like girls and boys just going around, but it's fun that we get to play this part. And so, no, I'm grateful that maybe like, what I make is inviting contributions from others, I think that's awesome. But I just realized like, I just want to be part of that transmission tradition, I guess.
I love it, man. It's participating again. And I think
participating, I think you gave me a word that I'm going to carry with me, because I think that you're right, that it is probably the word that encapsulates the best the way that I interact with art and have interacted with art since I was a kid. So,
well, hey, I mean, that's great, man. And I think, just for anybody listening back to this too, I think that's such a good goal to have, is not to have the goal to have $1 million, not to have a goal to, be the biggest name or be better than whoever, but is just the goal is always to participate and to not stop participating, right?
And no, for sure. And also the last thing I'll say is that like, the key is the best part of it is when you participate as yourself. When you figure out inside of you what is kind of unique about your collection of taste that adds up to something that adds something to the conversation that nobody else could have said,
Yeah.
And so every artist goes through the phase of wanting to emulate something they adore. But it gets really fun and really fulfilling once you realize like, hey, like that journey I've been on, that weird album that my mom played that instead got me into jazz, or that movie that I saw when I was a kid that nobody else saw that just gave me these striking nightmares, but that now inspired this thing, and that sentence that my friend said that became a lyric. All that stuff that was in my life added up to what I'm now contributing and participating with. And so I feel like I would invite everybody to find a way to participate. And then you don't have to become a professional. You don't have to become like an ambitious person, but like make some room in your life for creation. Like get right now, like get on the App Store and download a music making app or like a drawing app or something to create anything, and just create a little bit of something.
Absolutely.
And you'll see how much it augments your life. So that's my invitation.
It's beautiful, man. And even like fandom, you can, that's a way to participate too, I think. There's all these amazing fan communities making their own art and kind of participating in or contributing to whatever world they're a fan of. Like all of that stuff is equally valid to me,
Oh, absolutely. I'm always amazed at how talented, like specifically, I mean, I'm like a proud father, but like my fans are. And the fan art they make and the derivative work they create that's inspired by what we do. It's like, it's a great conversation. And yeah, you're right. Like sometimes like you just take something you're passionate about, and maybe you're passionate about an existing artist and you want to create something and participate there. But like, yeah. Just locate your fire and then feed it.
Man, I love that, man. And real quick, just because I wrote this down, I want to make sure I got it in. Earlier, you mentioned being into magic when you were younger, and still to a certain extent. You're probably already aware of this, but I've talked to a few other DJs and producers who also had a very strong magic background. And
oh my God, like who? I know about Slumberjack, but that's the only one.
Slumberjack, I was going to bring them up. There's an amazing hip hop DJ named Mike 2600 who you might be a totally different scene from you, but he's very into it. He made his own deck of cards and did like he's got a whole thing. And God, there's another one too. But it was just always fascinating to me, man. I was talking to Slumberjack about the ethics of like sampling magic tricks in comparison to like sampling in music. It's a lot of interesting parallels. Are you still engaged with that world at all?
Not really with that world. I don't really follow that community, but I do perform magic quite often, and I create stuff. And it's like a nice little, like, it's one of my only like creative outlets that don't involve a computer. So I try to preserve it. And it's funny because when I was a kid, I didn't like performing magic. I liked inventing it, but I didn't necessarily. And now that I'm an adult, I feel more comfortable performing, and it brings me a lot of joy. I get more nervous performing magic than I do doing a concert though, like by far. Like I'll do a festival more easily than I'll do like perform to my friends a new trick. So it makes me really nervous, but I do enjoy it immensely. And I as I said, like I found that some of the elements of it found their way into the show. Like the way that even my hand movement on stage, and then certain like visual tricks that we've invented. Like there's in the new encore to the show, we now have this whole sequence where we're using this like hydraulic like lift thing.
I've seen, it looks amazing.
Have you seen those images? You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, it looks crazy. Yeah.
Thank you. And so that whole idea, the way that we're using lighting to hide the mechanism, and we're blinding people with lights so that they don't see a certain thing, like, and the angles and the way we position, like all of that stuff was like really natural and came naturally to me because of my magic background. And because I'd read books about like stage magic that you employ those illusions. I'm like, damn, like I would never have come up with this moment in the show, and I would never have executed it this way if it hadn't been for magic. So I'm like, so funny how it seems like completely removed, and then yet it eventually finds its way in. And this is why I'm so passionate about this show right now. It's because I feel like, it kind of all led to this, like all of my interests, all of my passions, all of the little things that I cared about as a kid, like even world building, creating characters, like all of it, I can see it adding up to this show. And I've made incredible memories with the people that contributed to it as well. And so it's that's why I'm pumped about it. It's like, and if somebody sees it and doesn't like it, I'm like, it's okay. It's still like, it's my baby.
Yeah.
And thankfully people have like reacted to it positively. So I'm really happy with that. But yeah, like it feels so different doing this show than it did doing my past tours, because my past tour I felt like I'm going somewhere, but it's not fully me yet. This time I'm like, hey, it's pretty close to what I've been building towards. So now I just want to keep growing it, make it bigger, make it more exciting, augment it, and continue to grow as a person, and hopefully let that inform what the next show will be. But yeah.
I mean, man, you summed it up real well. I don't know what else I can even ask you after that, man. I mean, obviously the focus is the tour, and I'm sure, like you said, you're going to keep going and building it up. When you're in something like this, do you even think at all about what comes after that?
Yeah, there's always the good faith era I knew was going to be a long era. And for me, and so it's continuing to grow. And I had all these like dreams and stuff early on, and most of them I've been able to realize. And even little things, like I really wanted to have like physical places. So we did a pop-up shop once. That was, so I've been checking a lot of the books, and I have a few more big projects within the era that I haven't realized yet. So I want to make sure to like be thorough before I close that chapter. But I knew that good faith was going to be my 20s, basically. Like I came up with the idea when I was 20, and who knows how long it'll be before I completely close that chapter. Maybe sooner, maybe a little bit later. But regardless, it'll have been most of my 20s, and I kind of knew that when I started. I was like, this feels like this moment in my life. And yes, but to answer your question, yes, I'm always planting the seed of what's next, because it takes a while to grow. And so there's always some overlap. So, as we were doing the shelter era last time, I was already deep into good faith. So even though we were touring and marketing and everything shelter, in my head, like every time I was working on good faith. So there's already a little bit of that overlap. But yeah, so you always have to be thinking about the next thing at the same time. But there's a few more surprises in this first, I think. Yeah.
Absolutely, man. Well, this has been really great, man. I appreciate you taking the time to do it. I really enjoyed talking with you. I'm just going to ask the last question. This is the same question I ask at the end of each one of these episodes. It's kind of just like a free association, first thing that pops into your head kind of question.
Mm-hmm. Let's do it. First, I want to thank you for having me over.
Oh, absolutely.
And also, you're really good at this.
Oh, thank you so much, man.
And I'm sure that's similarly to what we've discussed. Like, I'm sure this is what you're doing with this podcast echoes probably skills or like intuitions that you've had for a long time that have found their way. Like, did you find that you've been like a good conversationalist your whole life, or is this a recent skill?
Not at all. No, it's...
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, no, I feel... I will say the connection maybe is that I was a huge fan of podcasts for many years before I started this. And I mean, I've just been a DJ and producer my whole life, but I was such a fan of podcasts that I was like, why is nobody doing this for the people I know and the communities I know? Because there's a lot of good stories and interesting people and all that. And after a while, I was just like, well, I guess I got to do it, because if I don't, someone else will do it and I won't like it as much. But yeah, no, man, it's enriched my life participating in this culture. Absolutely. Like podcast culture, even. I'm a better conversationalist now. I get to make connections with people in ways I wouldn't have otherwise, whether it's friends of mine or people I'm meeting for the first time. It's a beautiful thing, man. I'm very thankful for it. I don't know if that answers your question, but
it does. I was just curious about kind of the journey that led you to this as well.
It's a funny thing. I don't know. Do you feel this way about what you do? Because I'm very grateful to receive that compliment, and I hear it and I appreciate it. But it's still, when I sit down to do an interview with this, I never feel like I know what I'm doing. I never really feel like I'm great at it, even though I like the end product. Mm-hmm. And I don't know, how is it for you when you create something like that?
I have a lot of insecurities, but I don't specifically experience imposter syndrome as much. I know a lot of artists do, but I feel, I guess I've managed to trick myself into like not questioning legitimacy, because I know how dangerous of a black hole that can be.
Yeah.
So I just question whether it's true. Like, I think, is what I'm making that true? Do I like it? Is it me? Is it? But I try to like really like block out the thought of, am I worthy of even saying it? Like, am I legitimate to do it? Because I think the answer is always no. Like, if I really examine it, there's no reason for me to be in front of all these people and they're looking at me. It's like, there's no way to justify it really rationally to me. So I just decided I'm never going to question that. I'm just going to assume it makes sense. But I'm going to question, what am I doing with this opportunity? Am I being true? Am I doing good work? Am I being sincere? Am I being myself? So those are more of my questions. And I try to not question whether I'm trying to not ask myself if I'm good, but rather if it's good. You know what I mean? That's quite different.
Well, it's the weirdest thing, right? Because I relate to what you're saying, and I feel about my own work. Like, I like my own work, and I think my own work, like, I'm confident in saying, generally what I make is good. But then at the same time, when I sit down to make it, I never feel that I know what I'm doing or that it's a guaranteed outcome. And
it's never solved.
Yeah,
right.
It's just a weird thing of like, who are we? Like, what are we, right? Where if we can make this work, and we know we can, but we don't always feel like the person who makes the work, then who's making the work? I don't know. This is getting down a rabbit hole.
I resonate with what you're saying, like, a lot. We should talk about it some other time. I'm just looking at the time because I have another interview in a bit, so I want to do the fast.
Yeah. Well, come back anytime, man. I'd love to continue this conversation. But
amazing.
Yeah,
all right.
Man.
So it's free association, one word, and I say a word back.
Not even one word, but just kind of the first thing that pops into your head. Just looking for a memory, a moment from your life. Could be from any time when in that moment, music really deeply affected you, really had a deep impact on you in that moment. And that's meant to be super broad. There's no wrong answer.
Okay. Oh, so is that the question?
It? Yeah.
Like
what's the first memory or moment you think of?
I'm sorry. Okay, I get it.
No, that's great.
There's a few. Actually, I have a memory, but I'm going to save it for the next project because I think it's so fundamental to the next thing that I want to save that anecdote. So I'm going to say something else.
Great.
One of my great music memory is the song "Digital Love" by Daft Punk. The first time I heard it, I realized it was the best thing ever, and I still feel this way. I think it's incredible. And I've decided to be really careful about what I attach to it. So I don't listen to it constantly. It's not like in the background playing. I remember like first discovering it, and I think I was 10, 11, and then putting it on my MP3 player, which could host like 10 songs. And that was one of the 10 songs. And I just played it in loop. And I remember like being on a trip, I think, with my parents, and like listening to it and like sitting down being like, this is so good that the world is better for this existing. Like, it's incredible how important this is to me. Like, I remember being overwhelmed by how much this song mattered to me.
Wow.
In a way where I was almost scared by it, right? And then since then, I've been like playing that song at special moment, like driving down the beach with like a romantic partner and blasting it and trying to attach good memories to it every time. And like adding a lot of adding like magic to it by only playing it when I feel good and I feel like it's the time. So it's like the holder of memories, that song. I make sure that I only open the lid when it's right. So that's
beautiful, man. And I think that ties back into everything we were talking about of the concept of joy and holding on to a feeling that you can't actually hold on to, and keeping certain things precious and all of that. I think that's a perfect way to wrap it up, man. And thank you for doing this, man. I really enjoyed this talk.
Likewise. Thank you very much. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely, man. And have a great rest of your tour. And hopefully we can come back and do this again sometime.
Let's do it.
All right, man. Thank you so much.
Best of luck. Have a good one.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Peace.